there's a very simple thought that sometimes bothers people. The Torah has, among other things, commandments. The same God that gave the Torah and put the commandments into it is a God who created and creates, present tense, the world. So surely God took into account, when he made the commandments, the strengths and weaknesses of people to whom he addressed the commandments. So, sounds like I'm obligated to fulfill all the commandments perfectly. And pleading that I can't must be unrealistic, because God took into account my strengths and weaknesses and all my abilities when he set up the system. So it means absolute, complete compliance, obedience, immediately. But that's just overwhelming. That's just like beyond belief. Even for someone who grew up in a religious household, let alone someone who didn't grow up in a religious household. Even someone who didn't grow up in a religious household and who comes to Ohr Somayach, the best place in the world. Okay. No commercials. And he learns, certainly, he's obligated to do everything that he learns. Maybe you can't be obligated to do what you don't know. Okay, fine, you make an honest effort to learn. But certainly, you hear halacha, you have to do it. What possible excuse could there be to fail at anything? And then some people are bothered by another idea. What does it mean, I have to do it? I have an obligation to do it. Could I possibly be obligated to do something that I can't do? Wouldn't that just be obviously a contradiction? Maybe I'm obligated to do everything I can do, but something which I really can't do, I couldn't be obligated to do, could I? What sense would that make? And that reflection is backed up by no less an authority than Immanuel Kant, who said, ought implies can. When you say someone ought to do something, you're committing yourself that he can do it. Otherwise, it's wrong to say that he ought to do it. And don't we have limitations? So let me start briefly with the second idea. The second idea, from our point of view, is a mistake. And not only our point of view, Avdol, there are many philosophers who disagree with Kant. Now, you think, but how is that possible? Disagree? I have an obligation to do something I can't do? And the answer is yes, you have an obligation to do it. But if you fail, and you fail because you can't fulfill it, you're not subject to any penalty, no punishment, no negative judgment, no accusation. You're not liable. Obligated you are. But in this case, when you failed to fulfill the obligation, because you couldn't have fulfilled it, you're not subject to any penalty. The difference sounds so thin, as if to perhaps just be playing with words, to say you really are obligated, but there's no penalty if you fail, and so forth and so on. But it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. Let's imagine a case like this. George borrows money, signs a document. On June 5th, he'll pay it back. $25,000. When he borrows it, he has collateral, he has money in the bank that he needs for other things, he has a house. He's quite confident he'll be able to pay it back. And then the house burns down and his bank goes bankrupt and loses all that money and so on. Comes June 5th. June 5th, He hasn't got money. He doesn't have any money. According to Sir Immanuel Kant, since it's impossible for him to pay the money back, he has no obligation to pay it. He can't have an obligation to do something he is not capable of doing. Maybe when he'll have money in the future, the obligation will be reinstated, but at the present moment, since he has no money, he has no obligation to pay it. According to the Jewish view, he has an obligation to pay it. He shouldn't be penalized by his failure to pay. Shouldn't be charged extra interest. Shouldn't be criticized. He can't do it, and it's not his fault that he can't do it. What's the difference? The difference is, if I have spare cash, and I could lend him the money to pay the loan, should I do that for him or not? According to Immanuel Kant, there's no reason for me to do that, because he doesn't have an obligation to pay. There's nothing wrong with the world the way it is, because everybody's living up to all of his moral obligations, he included. He just doesn't have any obligation to pay. Why should I give him money to pay? For what purpose? What do I accomplish? According to the Jewish picture, he owes the money, and he's failing to live up to his obligation. No penalty, he can't help it. But there's an unfulfilled obligation. The world is a place with a moral looseness, a moral breakdown. If I give him the money to be able to pay the loan, I've helped him fulfill an obligation. I've made the world a better place. The Torah requires us to take responsibility for each other's mitzvos, not just for our own. If I see Reuven and he can't do some mitzvah, and I can help him do it, I have an obligation to help him do it because he's obligated to do it. It's just that he pays no penalty for not fulfilling the obligation, but he has the obligation. So I'm enabling him to do something that he ought to do. And in that way, I'm making the world a better place. So the obligation is to be perfect. The obligation is to do everything. But then we have to go back to the original question. Why then am I able to claim incapability as an excuse to avoid a penalty, an excuse to avoid any negative consequences, when God took into account my abilities when he made the obligations? Now, the first thing I want to prove to you is that the proposition is correct. Yes, you're not expected to do everything perfectly immediately. That's simply a mistake. As natural as the idea sounded at the beginning, it's a mistake. And after I hopefully have convinced you of that, then I will explain to you why it is that way. Two of the clearest expressions of why that idea is a mistake are found in the Rambam. One is in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Hey, the 5th chapter of the Laws of Repentance. The very beginning, and of course, the Rambam, like any of our great thinkers and authors, when he writes words, he means the words precisely, literally, in the order that they're given, and to be taken seriously. And Mishnah Torah, of course, he wrote in Hebrew, so we have his exact language. As against his other works, which he wrote in Arabic, and they were dealing with translations, this we have his exact language. Rishus kol adam nesunalo. Rishus here means power, not permission. Power is given to each person. Imrotza lahatos atzmo, l'derech tova, v'liyos tzadik, harshus biyado. If he wants to incline himself to a good path and be a tzaddik, so to speak, righteous, he has the power to do that. If he wants to incline himself to a bad path, Lios Rasha, and to be evil, the power is in his hand. Right? Statement of free will, what you can do with free will. Notice how many extra words there are. Notice how long the description is. Notice how vague it is. He says, if he wills it, to incline himself to a good path, and be righteous. Golly, why doesn't he just say it straight? If he wants, he should be righteous. And if he wants, he can be wicked. What's this? Inclining to a good path. A path is a process. It's a way of traveling towards a goal. And he doesn't say travel on the path. No, he says incline yourself to the path, which you will then travel and become a tzaddik. That sounds like a long-term process. That doesn't sound like, it's 8:15, you're having coffee, perfection today, period. Because God knows what you can do, and he made the Torah, and he made it to fit you, and therefore you have to do everything right. On the contrary, the straightforward implication of all these words is that it's a process. Becoming a tzaddik is a process to which your free will enables you to incline yourself to the path of the process, and then requires more and continuous development so as to continue to do that. 1 second. I'm giving a shir now, and I'm finishing at 9:30.
At 9:30?
Yeah. Okay, I guess I can stop the shir and sign. Yeah.
Where are you? I'm going to go with the bump in or somewhere, but I don't know where to go.
Laufer Hall, knock on the door, I'll come out and I'll sign the papers. Okay. One of my children needs to have guarantees for a loan. So, okay, that's one thing. Now another thing is this: the Rambam talks about in Hilchos Deos, people's character traits, and many of them can be put on a spectrum where each extreme is bad, and some kind of middle range is good with respect to certain types of character traits. For example, how people deal with money. You probably are aware of both of the failures. There are people who can't hold on to money, they can't save money. As soon as they get it in their hands, they spend it. They can't control it. They compulsively spend money. There are other people who can't spend a dime, even on themselves. When they die, they find $250,000 in cash in their mattress. In the meantime, they have no clothes, they're starving, they have no medicine. They just can't spend money. They've got to hold on to it. Both of these are tragic extremes, which are life destroying. Okay, how do you solve the problem? Says the Rambam, if a person is currently stuck in one extreme, his therapy is to go to the other extreme. After he goes to the other extreme, then gradually he can move to try to occupy a place in the area of the middle. Now stop and think what that means. The extreme he's in is bad. And the first step in this therapy is to go from bad to bad, not bad to good, from bad to bad, from one bad to another bad. And only later, because the fact that he's stuck in one extreme means that extreme has a hold on him. He's a prisoner of that extreme. The first thing he's got to do is break that prison. He's got to break that stranglehold that extreme has on him. And you do that by going to the other extreme. You use the second bad to correct the first bad. And then only afterwards do you move gradually into the center. Which again means the fact that God created the world and he gave you all the powers that you have. And he took that all into account when he assigned the Torah. And you're obligated to do the whole thing doesn't mean that you're able to do the whole thing. Doesn't mean that. Doesn't imply that. At best, he gave you the tools to engage in a process. And that process can be a long-term process whereby you gradually approach, you become better and better over the process to the point where you can approach being a tzaddik and then perhaps even to accomplish being a tzaddik. But in the meantime, it is simply not true that you have the ability to decide to be a perfect tzaddik. It's not within your ability. Now, why is it that way? What's the point of making a system that way? There are many answers here, and I'm not going to be able to give you all of them because I don't know all of them, and it's a good question to ask other people to get their perspectives on it as well. But one of the elements here is self-creativity. Self-creativity. There's a famous verse, which many people know and understand. Ela told us Noach ish tzadik tomim haya b'dorosav es Elokim v'salach Noach. These are, according to Rashi, in plain pshat, these are the products of Noach's life. Noach. Ish tzadik, a man who's righteous. Tomim, pure, straightforward in his generations. Tzaddik and straightforward in his generations. In his generations, by both. He walked with God. And he had 3 children. So the commentators say, we're talking here about products of his life, because if it was really his offspring, his progeny, then it should have gone straight from Ela told us to the fact that he had 3 children. It tells us what 3 children are. No, this is what he created in his lifetime. And being righteous, being straightforward, honest, and pure, walking with God, these are things that you create. And you also create children. You also create children. Iker told us, Sehem shel tzadikim, ma'asim tov. The fundamental products of a great person's life is the good deeds that he does. Everybody knows that pshat. Rashi mentions that pshat. But that pshat leaves out one thing. The way the verse is written, it says, Ela told us Noach. Noach. It repeats his name. Ish tzadik tomim haya b'dorosav. Why does it repeat his name? You would never repeat his name in English. These are Noach's accomplishments. He did A, B, C, D, and D. You wouldn't say, these are Noach's accomplishments. Noach did. We know we're talking about Noach. That's how we started the sentence. Why does it repeat his name? Because these are the accomplishments of Noach. His accomplishment is Noach, himself. He made himself. Kodesh Baruch Hu creates each person with an empty space. Of course, there's the rest of the substance of the person which Kodesh Baruch Hu creates. But he creates each person with an empty space. And he says to the person, one of your projects in this world is to fill the space yourself. I'm not giving it to you. You're to be self-creative. A human being's actions have effects in 2 dimensions. Your action affects the world around you, usually, and an action affects you. When you perform an action, it reinforces the motivation that's moving you. It dampens and weakens motivation that will be countervailing to what you're doing. You build your own character when you make choices. And I'm creating you with a character that's at least flexible, at least fluid, at least one that's malleable, and even, in some cases, with empty spaces, things that when you start out your career you haven't thought of, you haven't dreamt of, you have experiences, and all of a sudden you realize there are options in the world that you never dreamt of. You meet people, you observe people, and you think, wow, a person could live like that. That's something worth thinking about. Maybe that's something worth imitating, worth growing into. So that's like opening up a new vista. But then, implementing it, absorbing it, developing it, is your own project. That's your own project. So, that being the case, obviously, excuse me for a minute. Oh, I gotta take this off before I ruin this. I want you to know there's a halacha. You're a judge, and you're hearing people. I'm not supposed to have this here, right? I'm supposed to have it underneath or something. And you're hearing cases. If one of your relatives is in the waiting room, and they're online. You take your relative and you bring him in first. Don't hide yourself from your own flesh. So, I wouldn't have scheduled an interruption, but it had to be that way. Okay, so when you're performing your actions, you're building yourself. Because Baruch Hu says, I want you to be self-creative. But to be self-creative means you can't be a finished product. So there have to be good character traits that you don't yet possess. And you have to work on developing them. And your actions have to be improved. They can't be ideal at the outset, because then you didn't do it. At the very least, even if you're doing everything right, doesn't mean you're doing everything ideally. Hasidim used to talk about doing tshuva on your mitzvos, because you didn't do your mitzvos in the best possible way. And that also is something which you're failing at, would have to improve. So, that's one reason why the process is inherently a gradual process. Now, having said that, let's split the point between two phases of history. It wasn't meant to be that way. It wasn't that way at the beginning, was it? Adam was created as an adult, a fully developed adult, with all his powers at top strength. He was given one mitzvah, or maybe two, to do on one day, because some say eating from the other trees in the garden was a positive mitzvah. There are those who say that. The Zohar says that in that challenge was wrapped up all of what we call the 630 commandments. This was a gigantic performance which could have ended in one act. Had he succeeded, according to many, by the way, had he succeeded until nightfall, then he could have eaten from the tree. But okay, that's outside material. But that was the goal. So he didn't start as a child. He didn't start learning things gradually. As we saw, those were also learning the Derech Hashem, that we start out with a terrible handicap, because we are born totally physical. We're born without any functioning spirituality at all. No capability to make any decisions, no knowledge to make any evaluations. We're like little animals. And we grow very gradually. And as we grow, and as we mature, as we develop these spiritual capabilities to the point where we become responsible for our actions at the age of men 13, women at 12, but then those abilities are coming after many years of physical existence, physical experience, physical activities. It's stepping into an already made environment, which is overwhelmingly physical. And the growth goes on, continues gradually. So that's our world. And in our world, the idea of instantly becoming perfect is simply, it's not in the cards. It's not expected, it's not in the cards. And that's why this thought that I have to do everything is a terrible mistake. Now, one way we try to control this intuition in Ohr Somayach is by saying, either explicitly or implying, that when you learn things about the Torah here, you have to have two lists. I call it the list of your standard and the list of your ideal. There are two types of things people recognize as good and appropriate and worth working on. One is part of your standard for yourself, which means that if you fail, you're guilty. You've done something wrong. To that extent, you're bad. The other is your ideal. It's something to work towards, hope for, grow in that direction, improve. Woe to the person who's already accomplished his ideals. Such a person needs a new set of ideals. The idea of ideals is to inspire you to strive. But the fact that you didn't live up to your ideals is what you expect out of ideals. That's exactly the position that you're in with respect to ideals. That doesn't make you bad, doesn't make you a failure. And you don't have to clap al chait. You don't have to confess failure. Because since it is beyond your capability, there's no liability for it. No negative judgment for it. Now I want to give you some illustrations of how this works, because only in the illustrations you see how the idea applies to real life. I was once in a city in America. I met a fellow who was in his 40s, who was doing very well financially, a very responsible position in a large corporation. And he came to a Shabbaton that we made, and he was impressed. He had a family, impressed with the idea of Shabbos, the whole thing. And he said to me, Rabbi, I have a problem. I saw what Shabbos could mean, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and I would love to incorporate it into my family life. But you see, I work on Saturdays. I said, really? What do you do? He says, well, on Saturdays I play golf. I said, oh, wait, you're a golf master? No. The golf course is where we negotiate new contracts. That's where it's done, Rabbi. It's done on Saturdays. You get to the 16th hole. If you're doing well, you sign the contract. And now the 18th hole, you shake hands. And on Monday morning, you'll sign the contract. I've got to be on the golf course. I can't do anything. I can't. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my whole living. So I said to him, how many Shabbos a month must you be on the golf course? He said, at least 2 or 3. So I said, well, here's my proposal. Keep Shabbos once a month. Okay. Here's the crucial parting of the paths in the forest. I'm not saying, poor God, if only he could see modern economics, how this works, you see. He'd know that you can't prohibit golf at Shabbos because you can't run a corporation without that. We'll fill it in for him, we'll make it up because things have changed and new things are important and responsive. No, that's intellectual suicide and it's evil. But what you can say is, Shabbos is once a week, every 7 days is Shabbos for 25 hours, period. That's what Shabbos is. No modifications. But you can't do all of it. You can't do all of it. Not right away. Start with what you can do. If one Shabbos a month is what you can do, then that's what you should do. But another student here many years ago from Michigan State University, and he also was impressed by Shabbos. He was here for the summer program. He was here for 6 weeks. He said to me, Rabbi, I have a terrible conflict. Because Shabbos is beautiful, but Saturday, what's the most important thing at Michigan State University? Football. Number 2 is football. Number 3 is football. Number 4 is dating, exams in March at 7 or 8. And he said, Rabbi, don't talk to me about football. I'm not hearing it. Saturdays are for football. End of story. That's his dilemma. So I said to him, I knew the answer. I said, did they play football Friday night? He said, no. I said, keep Friday night. Now, Shabbos is 25 hours. It's not 24 hours, not 24 hours and 42 minutes. It's 25 hours, period, approximately. That's what it is. But you can't do it. You're not ready to do it. You're not capable of making the decision to do it. Do what you can. If the obstacle is football, commit yourself to Friday nights. Same with kashrus. There are biblical commandments of kashrus and rabbinic commandments of kashrus. Rabbinic commandments are binding. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to follow them, but they're not as stringent as biblical commandments because God didn't make them, the rabbis didn't make them that stringent. They themselves made them less stringent. So start with the biblical commandments. Start with a subset of the biblical commandments. Non-kosher seafood. Start with that. It's a gradual process, one by one. Now here I want to address the most common objection to this process, and that's hypocrisy. Isn't it hypocritical to say that you believe in something and not do it? Let's go with Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is true, derogatory speech about other Jews. Not allowed to lie about anybody, but when it's true, for other Jews, you shouldn't say it. Okay, and somebody says, I know it's wrong, and I know that I'm guilty of it, but I'm going to get control. Gradually. I'm going to start with 2 hours a day. 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock a.m. No, okay, p.m. 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m. And at least I'll keep clean during those 2 hours. So I get a call at 3:30. Hello, did you hear about Philip? Yeah. Could you call back at 4:30? Because these are my 2 clean hours, see? But after 4:30, that will be right. I'll be fine. I'd love to hear. So I say, are you joking? Is there anything serious about this? What kind of spirituality is that? 2 hours off and the rest of the time you just do what you please? But the critic is a mistake. The critic is a mistake because unlike 2 months ago, now 2 hours of every day is clean. That's progress. I didn't have any systematic hours that were clean 2 months ago. And now I have these 2 hours. Now there's a split, another split. Either I'm doing everything that I can or I'm not. Sometimes people fool themselves. They're easy on themselves. They create excuses. If I'm doing everything that I can, then I'm not penalized at all for anything else that I do wrong. That's what we said 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. It is not expected, because you have free will, that you will snap your fingers and be perfect. It's expected, although you're obligated to do everything perfectly, but what you're held to and rewarded or punished for is doing everything you can. So if you do everything you can, you're perfect. You're perfect. You're doing everything that you can. You're not subject to any penalty whatsoever. That's certainly a great accomplishment. But let's say you're easy on yourself. You're soft on yourself, and you're rationalizing, and you could do more. But still, your overall performance is improved. That's also a benefit. Gradualism is always appropriate. It's always appropriate out of as a way of making progress. Keeping kosher. I've been told many times, Rabbi, I could keep kosher at home. I control what I do at home. My roommates, whatever it is, I can do that. But I have social obligations. And I'm not capable of taking a tuna fish sandwich to the royal barbecue or to other celebrations. I just can't do it. And Rabbi, with all my faults, I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite. So, I'm waiting for the moment when I can do kashrus consistently. Not halfway, but consistently. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. And given everything that I have told you, this is a mistake. Because gradualism is the way in which the Torah expects us to proceed. But why is it a mistake? Why is it not hypocrisy to say you believe in something and not do it? And the answer is because that's a wrong definition of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is where you say you believe in something and you don't try to do it. You don't make an honest effort to do it. That's hypocrisy. But a person who says, I believe that such and such is important, and he makes an effort where he uses all of his power to do as much of it as he can, and he doesn't do the whole job, he's not a hypocrite. So the crucial thing is to make the effort and to take the step-by-step progress approach. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. I tell the students, if you've ever been to Manhattan, it's not the only place, but you see buildings built out of bricks 80 stories high. How big is a brick? Like this. Can you build an 80-story building out of these little bricks? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. One brick at a time. Just one brick at a time. And gradually it goes up. There's a statement in Chazal. This is the way people quote it. It's not exactly right, but this is the way people quote it. Kol misha lo nivne beis hamikdash biyamav ki lo nechra biyamav. Anyone in whose days the temple is not built is as if it was destroyed. And the Kotzker Rebbe used to say the word biyamav, which we usually translate as in his days, the base in Hebrew can mean you use something as a tool. He translated it as anyone whose days are not used for building the Beis HaMikdash. The day itself isn't a means for building the Beis HaMikdash, as if it's destroyed in his time. And then the picture is this. Every day you are creating a new brick out of mud. So you form it out of the wet mud, you shape it, put it in a kiln, you fire it until it's baked. That's your day's product. And you can put your name in the mud. George Phillips Bridge. And that brick goes into the warehouse for building the Beis Hamikdash. No, it won't be built of bricks. I'm just making a story to make a point. Right? So now you have all these millions of bricks. Some of them have my name on them. Because those days are used to build the Beis Hamikdash. So someone says, but it's a brick. You can hold it in your hand. You can put it in your pocket. What is it worth? That's the Satan talking. That's the Yeshivat Ohr talking, the evil inclination. He wants to make this gesture insignificant so that you won't be able to accumulate them over time. Figure out your life expectancy and multiply the years by 365. You get quite a large number. Thousands and thousands and thousands of days. If every one of them is a brick, you could build a city with all those bricks. That's the attitude that you have to have in terms of the steps of progress that you make. If I would put up a motto on the wall of the home, it would be, don't despise small steps. Don't despise small steps. That's the Yeshivat Ohr talking to rob you of your enthusiasm. Think of learning a new language. How many words do you learn per week? Let's say there's a minimum of 6,000 words you need to know to be fluent in the language. Do you learn them in the first 3 days? First 3 weeks? First 3 months? But you give yourself time. It's a new language. Go through it systematically, and after a couple of years, I will have learned, correct, right, that's exactly right. That's the way to do it. Same thing with bodybuilding, sports. You go through it systematically, and you build yourself over time. The Torah is no different from those efforts. And to come to the final main point, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to discuss them. Just like in sports, and I'm speaking of someone who has done sports, even fairly recently, a trainer is an absolute necessity, because a person who's in the process of developing himself very often can't make correct decisions about what he should and should not do in training. And that includes both being too hard on yourself and being too easy on yourself. I had instances when I was pushing myself too hard. This idea of no pain, no gain, the fellow who was training me said that's an absolute lie. Pain is a signal that you're risking injury. And there are some exceptions, but usually pain is a signal to stop or lighten the load until the pain goes away. There are exceptions, but that's in general. The idea of no pain, no gain is a terribly destructive model. On the other hand, you may be unaware, I'm not talking about laziness now, you may be unaware of your capabilities. I was, a certain period of my life, not too long ago, I was running as exercise. I was doing 3 miles in a half hour, after I was 60. And the trainer said, I think you could do 4.5 miles in 45 minutes. Increase it by 50%. I said, listen, I'm over 60, Increase it by 50% in one shot? Shouldn't I work up to this gradually? He said, I don't think so. I think you can do it. I said, okay, you're the boss, you're the expert. I did it. It wasn't even really hard. Turns out when you're running for a half hour, at minute 28, your brain says, 2 minutes to go. You think, boy, that's good because I'm tired. Thanks, But when it's 45 minutes to go, your brain doesn't say that. No, 17 minutes to go. Keep running. All of a sudden, I was able to do it. So you need someone who can pace you. Same thing is true with Jewish development. You need someone who's had experience in guiding people through this process, and who's good at reading a person's character, his strengths, his weaknesses, and you invest in getting to know such a person, and then you can ask these questions and have reasonable confidence that the answer you'll get will be an answer that fits your reality. I've seen over my years many times both types of students. Students who push too hard. There's one guy went to a summer camp that we were running. He came in with a ponytail and earrings and painted toenails and so on and so on and so on. He came out with a black hat, a black jacket, a tie, white shirt, and everything else. And he came to the yeshiva. By January, he was asking me, I'm praying 3 times a day. I don't know if anybody's listening. I don't know if there is a God or there isn't a God. Like, put on all the external trappings, but internally, he hadn't grafted onto the system at all. On the other hand, we had a guy here, this was back many years, when it was much more popular with an earring. And after 6 months, he took the earring off, and we were afraid he was moving too fast. But then we found out that he had heard a lecture on Eved Nirtzah, such a thing as a Jewish slave who was supposed to go out after 6 years, and he refuses to go out, so they bore a hole in his ear, and he stays until the Jubilee. He thought, aha, I have an earring, that's like a hole in my ear. It says I'm a slave, I don't want that. So he took it out, he made it. He made it because he heard a Jewish idea, and he measured it to where he's sitting, and he's thinking, I don't want to be like that, I'd rather be like this. And he made it. So you need good advice to the kinds of decisions that you make. Now here's a mistake that people commonly make. In this regard, I'm at a certain stage in development. There are a number of interests that I don't yet do, so I don't do them regularly. What shall I take on? What should be my next step? Well, let's see what's legally more important. What's more central to the Jewish system? And then I should try to do the more essential ones first, because they're more important. This may sound weird to you, but that's a mistake. The criterion is not legal. Criterion is not systemic. The criterion is psychological. What will best aid your self-development? Let's take a very extreme example. Shabbos or blessings before you eat? Contrast is really, really striking. Shabbos is one of the 10 pronouncements at Sinai. Deliberate, warned violation of Shabbos carries a death penalty. Blessings before you eat are rabbinic. Like 2 ends of the spectrum. So you naturally think, well, if there's a choice between the 2 of those, it's a no-brainer. Of course, Shabbos. Not necessarily. Because committing himself to Shabbos may be too difficult. It may be too compromising. It may be too much of a stress. And that being the case, committing himself to Shabbos may lead him to simply fail, and then failure brings with it the sense, maybe this project isn't really for me at all because I thought I could do it and I see that I can't. Just like an athlete who pushes too hard and suffers a failure and suffers an injury and he can't train. That's not the outcome that you want. It could be that the right thing for him to do is brachos and not Shabbos. In this connection, I will mention that there was one of the great rabbinic figures of the previous generation who was asked by a 14-year-old girl. She said, I have decided to keep Shabbos. My parents are not religious at all. And they have told me that I will not keep Shabbos in their home. Not that they won't keep Shabbos, that's for sure. They told me I won't keep Shabbos. What should I do? And he wrote back to her, don't keep Shabbos. Not because your parents have the authority to tell you not to keep Shabbos, they certainly do not. But there's going to be a war between parents and a 14-year-old child. Yeah, I'll be prejudiced and say, and a 14-year-old girl, the chances are overwhelming that she's going to lose. And she's going to lose everything. I saw it when I was an undergraduate. I was becoming frum. We had a small circle of students who were interested in this. One boy, parents found out about it. They took him out of school for a year. They sent him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist beat it out of him. Came back the following year, wouldn't talk to us, had nothing to do with us. As far as I know, they were successful in beating it out of him, using a psychiatrist. So you have to be one of the authorities of the generation to make a decision like that. But the decision is there to be made, and it's not made on the legal criteria. It's made on the criteria of what will feed the person's development best. That's what the Torah wants from the person. The Torah prescribes that for the person. So this is the philosophy of gradualism. Questions up to here? Okay, now I want you to know that this is not just for Baalei Tshuva. I think almost every Jew, that's 98.999999%, live that way for all their lives or almost all their lives, because every Jew has a list of things that he's not doing as well as he feels he should, things which need improvement. And I would say it's almost universal that he doesn't have enough resources to work on all of them simultaneously. Certainly not to perfect all of them simultaneously, then we're back to the Rambam. So he has to make choices. He could choose to work a little bit on each one of them, or it could be reasonable for him to choose to work on a couple and to get them into very good shape, and then to spread out and work on others. And different choices will be right for different people. There's no one royal road. That's why guidance is really quite important. But the idea of the gradualism is built in all the way through. Now, having said that, there's one more thing that I can add. We have a few minutes left. Environment is very important. And Rabbi Salanter said, Chochmas Chaim, life wisdom, is knowing how to avoid challenges. Avoid challenges. If you have had a wonderful, delicious, fulfilling diet of bacon cheeseburgers, and you're now trying to get hold of your diet, don't walk past the McDonald's every day. Especially because from time to time they have 2-for-1 sales. 2 bacon cheeseburgers for the price. I can keep kosher next week. In the meantime, 2 for 1? Don't do that. Don't put yourself in that situation. Avoid situations in which you're going to be tempted. You'll tell me, but isn't the whole point of the system to face challenges and overcome them? To exercise our free will? Sure it is. Leave it to God. He'll arrange it. He'll arrange it. He'll arrange problems for you. He'll arrange challenges for you. Don't volunteer for that. I'll tell you one reason why not. Because when you avoid these challenges, when you avoid the temptations, what you're saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu is, I recognize how bad it is to fail. I don't want to fail. I don't want to violate your Torah. I appreciate how important it is to do the right thing. And I don't trust myself. And since I don't trust myself, I'm taking precautions. The Torah is based on precautions. Asu siyag LaTorah. Make a fence to protect yourself. What were the rabbis doing? To keep you away from circumstances where you might make a mistake. And you do that for yourself. It's a wonderful spiritual gesture to say, I appreciate how important this is, that I want to make sure, as best I can, that I don't fail. And because Baruch Hu wants you to face the challenge, He'll arrange it. He'll arrange it. Don't worry. He's not lacking resources to arrange it. When a person fails, the Rambam says, complete tshuva would be being in exactly the same circumstances that you were before, and this time doing the right thing because you know that's what you're supposed to do. This is Perek Beis Halacha Aleph. Now you say, well, okay, so the Rambam is telling me that complete tshuva means being in the exact same circumstances and succeeding this time. Isn't that an instruction that I should go and seek them out? No, it is not. And the proof is that the example he uses, which is based on the Mishnah and Yuma, is an example of something where it's forbidden to do that. It's forbidden to do that. He violated a sexual law. To succeed in the same circumstances would mean being alone with that woman and then this time behaving correctly. But it's forbidden for him to be alone with that woman. So that's forbidden him to recreate the circumstances. And that's the example of how you do tshuva. So, if a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants it to happen, you're going to your office on the 80th floor, and the elevator holds 40 people getting in, people going out, and you're on floor 78, so you have to go to the top, and you're reading the Wall Street Journal, and then coming up close to the top, and people are getting out. You see it's thinning out. You're up on floor 76, and in between 76 and 77 it happens. The elevator gets stuck. In between the floors, you look around. Guess what? The only people in the elevator are you and her. And you're stuck. And you're alone. He can arrange it. He can arrange it if he wants you to face the circumstance. Right? Don't go looking for it. Don't go looking for it. So this is a way of preserving the grip that you have on your performance. And as far as the purpose of our being here to face challenges, Kadosh Baruch Hu will face you with the challenges that you need to face. Okay? All right.